Good evening, everyone. I hope all is well. I know it's a little ugly outside, but I really appreciate you for taking the time to tune in. Right now, you guys are tuned into the Best of Blue, the March series brought to you by the Georgia State Alumni Association and the Young Alumni Council. So if you aren't familiar with the Young Alumni Council, don't worry, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about it right now. So my name is Javon Page. I'm the chair for marketing and events for the Young Alumni Council. It's a premier young professional organization for Georgia State University alumni. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to bring intentional conversations to fellow alumni and also the community at large, not just so we can have more opportunities to talk to you and give some more interface on some of the things that we have going on, but more importantly, so you guys can feel like you're heard, like the things that are important to you as a young professional or older professional are all being talked about. And one of the biggest things that we wanted to do is create space. And I think that's a perfect segue to introduce my brother, my friend, my family, OBO Jones.
What's going
You like
on?
that? Like that?
That
Yo,
was solid.
man. So, OBO, I just want you, first of all, to know that I'm so appreciative that you took the time to be on this. I know many of you may not have heard of OBO. I'm getting nervous talking to him now because he's such a superstar. But
Whatever.
OBO's been a friend of mine for a very long time, but he's actually created and started to be recognized in the space for just his own authenticity. He started conversations about gender, sexuality, and creating space, partly because it was liberating for him, but he actually opened up a whole lot of conversations with other people who've become more comfortable. He's kind of been thrusted into an advocacy role that I don't think he originally intended. It was just something that he was being obedient about. And I'm super happy to be able to have you and present you to some of the Georgia State audience. So,
Nice.
OBO, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't even know what else that needs to be said at this point, but I'm OBO, a native from Atlanta. I consider me a space creator and a queer advocate. So most of the content you'll see coming out of me is going to be in the name of liberation for the queer people and people at large.
Absolutely. So I'm
Yeah.
going to question is going to be a pretty vague question, but that's because I want you to kind of go with it.
Okay.
So creating space is become somewhat of a brand for you. And I wanted to know what exactly it means, what the original intention of it was to mean, and what it's become.
Yeah, I love the question. So let's go all the way back, right? I think a lot of times when we think about people who are coming into their own, right, we think about it being this very like aha moment for some of us. And I think for some of us, we don't have that same luxury, right? It's not like an aha, it's more of a I've always known who I am, but there's not a lot of space for me to be that person. And that's kind of what I dealt with, especially being queer, being black, a lot of intersectionalities, being Christian, like all these different things that were happening at one time. And just trying to figure out where can I go? Because there wasn't a lot of space. And I guess I'll keep using that word because it's so relevant, but there wasn't a lot of space. And so one day in prayer, the Lord just spoke to me and was just basically saying, like, you don't need to avoid these things. You don't need to like suppress your blackness or suppress your queerness or suppress your love for me. You are able to be all those things at one time. And there's going to be space that you're going to create for yourself, but you're also going to be able to create the same space for other people. And so that's kind of what I set out to do. And I try my best to meet people where they are because a lot of times we're dealing with this misinformation, right? We're just dealing with a lot of space or people just don't know how to create this space. Like, what does it look like for me to put someone in a room that I've never heard about, that I don't know much about, that I was taught to not like, that I, all these different things. And so what I'm doing is really creating lanes and spaces and social spaces, right? And giving people understanding that not only you can exist, right? And understanding or the lack thereof does not mean disrespect, does not mean suppression, does not mean exclusion, does not mean someone being outcasted. None of those things have to take place because you don't get it. And we live in a society often where we reject the unknown, right? Like we don't always know what it is. And because we don't know, it shouldn't exist. And that's not how life works. It's not just because you don't get it and now no one else can. It's like for me, I'm queer, I'm black, I'm all those things. I'm also a friend. I'm also a brother. I'm also a son. I also have a lot of love within me. And that should be able to be emitted in every space that I'm at, but it's not. And so learning words, learning terms, learning pronouns, learning how to appreciate and respect people, learning how in which your privilege can be used to suppress somebody else, right? Your privilege can equal a disadvantage for other people, and how unfair that is in a lot of ways, right? I think we see that a lot of times with blackness, but we're seeing it in major ways with queerness and trans lives and how they're dying at an alarming rate and how that shouldn't be happening. And certain things I think we're just used to existing. I think when you really start to think about it, it doesn't have to exist. right? Like somebody doesn't have to be the lesser for someone else to be the greater, right? But sometimes in these spaces, we find ourselves just looking at other people and feeling like, well, somebody has to take the brunt of this thing. And so, how do we then trickle that down to who's going to take the brunt? And it can't only be queer lives. It can't only be people who you don't understand. And so, for me, creating space, essentially, in so many words, it's just creating environments where people can be safely themselves, authentically themselves, and fully themselves. No disclaimer, no watered down, no changing the way in which you look, the way in which you speak, none of those things. There's spaces in which you can be your full self as long as you're not causing any hurt, harm, or danger. I didn't come to get churchy, but on to anybody else, you can be your full and authentic self wherever you choose to go. And that, in my opinion, is going to be how we create space and how we facilitate environments where we all can be our full self. And not just queer people, all people can be their full and authentic selves.
That's a really good answer. And it kind of brings me to my next question. So you mentioned being a part of multiple avenues and not defined by one particular space. You mentioned Christianity, you mentioned being queer, you mentioned being Black,
Yeah.
and I don't know where exactly I heard it. It might have been in the conversation with you, but I remember vividly having a conversation about a lot of times people being in a suppression Olympics and people worrying about being the oppressor as Black men, saying that a white man or our white counterparts have more advantage than we do, but not necessarily taking advantage and taking into consideration the sort of advantages that we have as, for instance, a straight man as opposed to a gay man. Can you talk really quickly? And I can stay on for this one. Can you talk really quickly about maybe the dynamics of being a gay man, how you've kind of received a different sort of narrative from either friends or people who thought you should have been heterosexual because you're more masculine? Can you have a conversation really quickly about the fact that people don't always acknowledge the fact that they might have more privilege than they put off because of their race?
For sure. I think not only to acknowledge your privilege, but you have to acknowledge um, who your privilege directly affects. You know what I mean? And so for me, instance, like when I walk into a space, I don't necessarily get pegged as a queer man initially, right? Like women will still assume that I'm straight. Other men assume I'm straight, so I don't really get to receive the same hate crime and hate speech that maybe my other brothers who maybe come off a little more femme presenting and all those things may experience. But at the same time, I think for me, which is why I'm a little more vocal, to be honest, which is why I'm a little bit more like upfront about the fact that I am part of this queer space, because there are people who think they can say certain things to me and you can't, right? I'm part of the LGBTQ community. Like it's not like a thing that like I'm just because I don't present a certain way and there's no true face for it. And so I think for all of us, like you said, straight passing privilege, straight privilege, male privilege, all these things are privileges, but they also kind of result in a disadvantage of other people. And the more we understand that, the more we can use our privilege to elevate and not suppress.
So, what would you say in the professional space has been the most difficult thing to navigate once you felt comfortable talking about these things and got the platform to do so, the sponsorships, and a lot of people wanting you to be the face of those conversations? If you don't mind sharing, like, how has that influenced, if it has affected any sort of your professional endeavors? Do you find it hard sometimes to authentically be yourself, or do you still feel like there's a need to suppress in some sort of ways who exactly you are to fit in certain confines?
Whew, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. Yeah, there's moments in which I feel still on guard a little bit because, to my original point, there isn't necessarily the space created always, right? Going into spaces that do feel very hyper masculine, and having to even like swallow your desire to be a little more docile and feel like you can't. And so for me, in certain spaces, and even in certain conversations I've had, people say things that are problematic. And the old OVO wouldn't have corrected them, right? The old OVO would have just been able to be in spaces where I know my full self isn't welcomed, but I'm gonna come here and pretend to be who I need to be in the room. And so now that I'm in my full truth and I'm not taking breaks, I have to kind of maintain a system of courage, to be honest, because I can't allow certain things to happen. And it's not always pretty. There are certain brands that will not work with you because they want to exist within what they think Christianity is, or what they think, you know what I'm saying, should be happening, what they think is normative. You know what I mean? I've lost friends All those things happen, but at the same time, I have to maintain the posture of my assignment, which I believe is my calling, which is, to liberate people in general, but more specifically, people who are being suppressed the most. And we're finding a lot of suppression within queer spaces, especially the Black queer space. And so for me, it's really, really about like making sure that I understand my assignment, all the while understanding that some people are not going to get it, and they're just not going to get it.
Are there ever any points when you feel like it's too heavy of an assignment? Especially
Oof.
considering the fact that it's almost so. If you haven't followed Obi on Instagram or TikTok or any of those kind of things, like he's gotten to the point of, I guess you can say, verification status, right? Like, I mean, I expected a blue check. I'm surprised it hasn't come yet. Maybe it's just because apply for it. But even in those spaces, like you have a whole lot of people supporting it, but we don't see maybe how many people don't, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
constantly people to attack who you are as an individual, as a man, your character, without even knowing who you are as an individual and taking that time, and then feeling like they have the autonomy to use the platform that they have in the comments and the DMs to
For
say
sure.
certain things that uh, are very much likely painful. Do you
Hmm.
ever feel as though you wish you wouldn't have created the space uh, for everyone else because it all comes down on you?
I've talked to God at least 3 times and ask, like, are you sure that you want to use me? Because it is a tough battle. I think sometimes when you're creating content that your mind is only to liberate, and I mean, well, and all these things, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to receive it that way. So I've gotten a lot of homophobia, I've gotten a lot of transphobia, a lot of different things that come my way based on the content that I do put out. But at the same time, I have to remind myself who my core audience is. And that goes across the board. Even the love that you get, right? Like the love I get from cis het people, I love it. Don't get me wrong. But my target audience is people who I'm talking to who I believe are going to be liberated by this specific message that I'm sending. And so in my mind, being mindful of the message has helped so much. But you're right. I get, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I get all the things, you know what I mean? And I get them constantly. But at the same time, it doesn't outweigh the fact that there are so many young boys, so many men, so many women, so many people who need to hear what I'm saying. And so I'm led by that. You know what I mean? And I think often you see what God will do to prepare you to be where you are. And I kind of, in my mind, have seen spaces in hindsight, right? Where like, okay, I get it. This is why I went through this, or this is why this happened here, or this is why I even went through shame, to understand shame in a way where I can speak to people who are in it still and and hopefully liberate them from it.
Really, really insightful stuff. I got a lot of questions. I'm sorry. So
I'm with it. You could go ahead.
I had 3 questions, but I have so many more now. So
Okay.
one of the I have is about anyone who wants to be in a position of advocacy. So one of the things that you and I talked about when
Yeah.
you told me who you truly were was about how best I could support, and didn't even realize certain things that I was doing to actually combat that advocacy that I thought I was doing, right? Even if it's something small or something minute that I didn't necessarily feel like it was an issue, it still was problematic in certain ways.
Yeah.
What would you say are certain things, maybe a few things that someone who's looking to be a stronger advocate or has a friend or a family member who identifies in the LGBT space, what are some things that they can do, that they can say, that they can be a part of to stronger, to be a stronger advocate and a stronger supporter of some of their loved ones who might be still trying to create space or trying to navigate the space that they've created?
Yeah. I love the question. I think first you have to identify if you are impartial or if you want to be an ally, which are two different things, right? Some people just they don't care, right? Like I don't care who you sleep with. I could care less. It doesn't bother me. I don't care. But I'm also not gonna go and champion the movement for you to be happy in spaces, right? I just legitimately do not care. And I think that's valid, I guess, right? That happens. And some people are in that space. And I think people sometimes feel like the absence of homophobia means you're automatically an ally, and that's not how the game goes either, right? There's a certain level of allyship that's required, and so I think for me, it's all about what support looks like, right? And I think in your close friendship circles, I think a big part of it is listening. right? Like being mindful of the fact that you need to listen to the people who are around you. Oftentimes, people's social cues and words will tell you all you need to know. But again, I think we're not paying enough attention to people often, especially our loved ones, right? We're just doing what we think is okay and not taking the time to really kind of iron out what does that look like. Also, being mindful of our privilege. That word probably gonna come up a lot as well. Like our privilege, right? Like there is a certain luxury of not having to wonder if someone's going to make you defend who you are, right? There's certain spaces in which you have to show improve, but being in a constant space, and even for me, I'm still getting out of that space right now, honestly, of having to defend my religion, defend my masculinity, defend who I am as an individual because of my queerness. And so it's going to go down to listening, I would say, number one. And number two, learn, right? A lot of, I think we put this social responsibility on the LGBTQ community, but most of us are one individual letter. I'm the G. I'm not the L. I'm not the B. I'm not the T. But but people still will look at me sideways if I don't understand pronouns or if I misgender somebody or those. But again, I'm not them, right? I'm still the same. I'm absent like you are. I don't understand the experience of transgender women. I don't understand it, but at the same time, I still have to be as a viable member of a community. I have to learn these things, and so I think the second thing is to take the time to learn some things. Like the same way we research ourselves, research things, learn, like ask some questions. And I would recommend having somebody who you feel close to. I love being asked questions on behalf of other people. I've had women come to me and ask me questions about their bisexual boyfriends or, whatever. Like you come to me and kind of get a little sense of what it is, because sometimes asking the person can be whatever. And the third thing I would say is if somebody has not outed themselves to you yet, I haven't told you who I was, but you're assuming that I am, just be a kind person until I'm ready. Don't force me out. Don't just be a kind person until I'm ready.
Yeah, I think that's a really big point, and something I'm starting to realize too is that you can't force everyone to have the same trajectory of a journey. Um, and as much as people try to, for lack of better terms, chastise individuals who haven't got to a point of comfort with
Yeah,
the download or any of those kind of things, I don't think they also are taking into account the amount of persecution that someone receives when they are out with those things. You lose
for
family,
sure.
friends, and those kind of things aren't something that a lot of people are ready to embark on, especially if they feel like they're going on a journey by themselves. Part of this
Yeah.
conversation was about dispelling certain myths, and one of the things that
Okay.
I talked about for as long as I can remember is nature or nurture, or is someone born as identifying as LGBT, or do they grow into it? Is there something that you can do if you see a kid playing with the wrong toy too soon? Is there something that you can do in the meantime? Are there conversations that need to be had? Is it because they have this many sisters or that kind of thing? And OBO always been super athletic, played football, was good at basketball. Him and I used to hoop together. So what would you say to that sort of conversation about nature and nurture? Like, do you feel like there's some truth to it? Is it just dependent on who the individual is? And what are some of the myths around that sort of situation?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think I can't blankly say in either one. I can't say that one or the other. For me, it was a nature I believe to be born this way. I believe that probably the majority of people who identify as gay, especially, were probably born that way only because who would choose to be, especially given the society we live in. If I wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I'm proud to be who I am today, but this was a journey to get here. And if I could have not had to take a journey to get to this place, I for sure would. But I also do think the way society is set up, we title people very quickly. I think it's a necessary part of the conversation as well. Like some people are not any of it. Some people are legitimately just fluid, just figuring themselves out. But I think on that journey to figure yourself out, especially when we see with Black men, we don't give them the luxury to really explore. And like if you try a thing, you are the thing, right? Like there's some people who probably just had more effeminate nature to them, probably rather, dance than play football, probably rather hang with women than men. And we just automatically assume because they were doing these things that was indicative of queerness. But behavior that has nothing to do with who you are on the inside, has nothing to do with what you're oriented to enjoy romantically, none of the things. But I think because of misinformation, we're taught that. And I think when you talk to impressionable kids, you can, let me use better words, you can make an impression on them that could possibly make them start to wonder what's going on. I've met so many men in their 30s who are realizing that they're actually bisexual, right? But for a lane that is not really talked about often, you don't really see a lot of bisexual advocacy, right? You don't see people talking about the bisexual experience. But because for us, it's like in the Black community, especially, if you like men, we call you gay. That's just what it is. But it's a lot deeper than that. And so I think back to the original, it's about like titling people too soon. You know, it's not about necessarily you hopping into it. So even the work I do is not about me titling you. It's about me liberating you to be free to be whoever you want to be. Like whatever that looks like, whatever it sounds like, whatever it walks like, whatever it enjoys. If it's a girl today, a guy tomorrow, if it's nobody, you should have the luxury to do that. But I think we have so many things, so many people who are pushing on us their own impressions. So we then get turned, is it nature versus nurture? Because that's necessary to even know, right? Like, regardless of what it is, I think the reality is we're consumed sometimes with, is it nature versus nurture? Because we're trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong, what was off. Like, was your biology off, or was the community you were in off? Something has to be off if you're anything but heterosexual, and nothing's off.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think in terms of the nature of fluidity, even if you have that conversation, especially with a black man, the first thing they'll do is get defensive. It's no, or no, I'm the straightest as it comes. There's a scale of 1 to 10. I'm 17. Like that. That
For
conversation is
sure.
that's usually welcome, especially in a black environment. You know, especially in
Yeah.
the heterosexual space. To be defined as heterosexual is like a calling card people kind of try to wear as a badge, but it isn't something that I think individuals at large really understand, that there's a nature of femininity and masculinity that exists in everybody, even if you want to get more spiritual with it, right? When you happen to be a little more empathetic, when you have a nurturing spirit, like those things are typically attributed to a feminine nature, but those things are also things that can be possessed by men as well. I guess
For
the next
sure.
question I have is, when you are when you were in the space, when you were letting people know exactly who you were, what were some of the differences and conversations you had with maybe a woman who might have been romantically interested in you before and never knew that you were really gay, and then men who would talk to you about women, and who is that? Oh, that's my homie Obio, and I know Obio's a good looking dude, so when there's a kickback, I'm gonna bring Obio over. What are some of the differences in those conversations? And when someone does find the courage, and I don't even want to say it's simply courageous to do it, because I think it's also courageous to know yourself and know whether or not you're ready in the first place. But when
Yeah.
some get to the space of when they do want to have those conversations, what is something they need to prepare for both genders? For a man who understands that he's gay, he needs to talk to maybe women who might be interested in him, and a man who realizes he's gay, and he also needs to talk to people who he is identified as friends. I think that's the biggest thing that I've been able to. How did you have those conversations with your family members, and what is some advice you have regarding that for anyone who is looking to do that?
Yeah. Start inward. Like make yourself comfortable with it, because there's a big difference between saying you're gay and being comfortable with being gay. Those are two different things. And I think even for me, I said I was gay before I was fully comfortable with being gay. And so you have people who identify in ways but are still not rooted in who they truly are. So my first piece of advice would be to get to know yourself fully first, and that way the way in which you come off will be indicative of how you want to be, what you want to be reciprocated, right? So like for me, when I told people finally, it wasn't like a sit down, here we are. It wasn't that energy, right? It was very like, hey, like you know what I'm saying? And you might have even found out in common speech where it was like, hey, I'm about to go call this guy I'm dating and see where he's up to. And you're like, guy you're dating, what? It becomes just like, but it's just like, I'm gonna throw it in there because I'm so comfortable. And I think when your comfort makes other people a little bit more comfortable with you, and so it gives people the autonomy to be able to say, like, to ask less ignorant questions, or to just handle you in a way that is not indicative of somebody who needs to be coddled. Because I also kind of resent the whole coming out thing in general, because I don't think it's all that necessary. I get the premise though, like to your point, like if someone knew you this way, I understand the idea of you kind of like coming into your own in a real way and reintroducing yourself. But at the same time, it's a lot of pressure to put on one person to then kind of go against. Often in your mind, you feel like, I'm going against ignorance, I'm going against dogma, I'm going against misinformation in a way that can be hard for one person. So I would get the advice I would give to anybody is who wants to tell someone is to tell them in a way in which you want them to receive it, and B, maybe two. Did I do one and two, or that A and B? I don't know. Let's go two. Two, I would say, don't internalize the ignorance of others. A lot of us are preparing ourselves for a certain level of ignorance or misinformation, so much so that we end up judging ourselves first, right? Like they're probably gonna think I'm this, they're probably gonna think I'm that, they might call me this, they may, and so now you have to kind of prepare yourself to be called these things. Now it's weighing down on your own energy. When in reality is again that comfort piece is going to be so vital because for me, I'm gay. I'm comfortable saying it. I'm not whispering it. It's not a secret. It's also not something that I have to necessarily shout from the rooftops if it's not what you want to do. If you have your guy, just have your guy. And that's what it is, right? But I think if you're telling people who are personal to you, maintain confidence, learn who you are first, as much as you can. I know it's a journey, and don't internalize the responses or the energy of other people.
I love that. I love that. This has been a really insightful conversation, and I know other people have some questions.
Cool.
So I just want to leave with this last question that I would
Yeah.
like to answer, and then after that, then we'll yield a couple questions and we'll wrap it up because I know some people want to enjoy the great weather outside. Um, and it was just 80 degrees 2 days ago. That's crazy. This crazy.
Literally.
Um,
Literally.
so what would be that final piece of advice that you have
Hmm.
for someone, no matter how old they are, what age they are, what juncture they are professionally? What is that one piece of advice that you can say that they can authentically create space? And how do they go about doing it? And how do they go about determining what their timeline is? I guess what I'm saying, to be a little more specific with it, to get into the minutia of it, is when did you know for a fact this is something that I'm doing today? And for those people who are looking to find that win, what are some of the things that they can know in the meantime to be able to navigate that space before they find that win, if they ever do?
To be themselves, you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Advice I would give to someone who is trying to be themselves, to find themselves. It's it's interesting that it's not more robust in this, but I would just say prioritize your own opinion. Other people's, first of all, opinions are not real, right? Like opinions are true to individuals. They're not true to the masses. And so what someone thinks of you or what someone thinks you should or should not be doing shouldn't hold more weight than what you think of you and what you think you should be doing. And I think the biggest advice I could give is to take back ownership of your own steps, because a lot of times, especially from young, we're taught to give our steps to other people, to wait on our cue to go, wait on our affirmation, wait on that degree, wait on our parents to say yes, wait on our friends to embrace us, wait on all these things. And so I would say stop waiting. You don't have to. Like, you're not here by mistake. You didn't slip through the cracks. God wasn't looking to the left and they snuck some gay into the pot when he was creating you, or snuck some. None of that was what happened. You're like, you literally are here on purpose with purpose. Don't forget that. Like, never forget that, because you're going. Because the more you forget it, the more power you're giving to other people over yourself.
Yeah. So, however many people are on this call just witness me steal this live, uh, on purpose, with purpose. I'm still in that. I'm being a motivation. So we did get a couple questions, but the questions that we got
Okay.
about how they can get to know you more, and where they can find you.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's a question, but could you just let them know how exactly they can stay in contact with you?
Absolutely. You can follow me on Instagram at OBO Jones, OBIOO Jones. You can find me on TikTok at OBO Jones. It used to be O, but my first page got taken down. You can also find me on YouTube at OBO period, because we make statements over there. And you can also go to my website, www.oboojones.com. I have a chat box where you can ask if you're going to ask me, get stuff off your heart. It's anonymous. Feel free to go in there if you need somebody to talk to, just an ear. And yeah. That's where you can find me.
Yeah, just the bars, OBO period, because we make statements. But man, I told you before, and I hope you realize it's coming from an authentic and genuine space, man. I really appreciate our friendship. I appreciate you coming on and sharing. And I think that
Likewise.
the community is better just because we had this conversation, and it can't stop here. We have to continue. So thank you so much, brother. I hope
Of
everyone
course.
has a wonderful week, and we're out.